and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, delighted that my guest this week is someone whose profile has been just going up exponentially, it seems to me, over the past year. Rupert Lowe is the Reform MP for Great Yarmouth. He was elected this year. Rupert, thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Good to see you. I said your profile had been going up. Are you aware of this? Or?
Well, my profile used to be much higher when I was chairman of Southampton Football Club.
Oh, really?
So I've spent the last 15 years trying to sort of make myself lower key.
Right.
And, you know, I was just beginning to get to the stage where people on the tube, or indeed cab drivers, they didn't know who I was, or don't now. They're just beginning to start to get to know me again. So, you know, people on the tube, I had a chap came over the other day and thanked me for what I was doing. You never quite know whether they're going to be friendly or malevolent. But, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think we're doing anything other than trying to give people better information, more transparent information. And we subscribe to the view that good government is transparent government.
Yes.
And even if it's not going right, people need to know the reasons why and try and understand how it can be improved.
Well, in terms of being transparent, you've got your work cut out with this lot, haven't you?
Well, Labour is the most extraordinary collection of very new MPs, very young MPs, very inexperienced MPs. You see them, they're clearly being briefed to, if you like, tee up the minister when they're at the dispatch box to try and ask them a nice tame question. You see these people pop up with their phones, and obviously the questions have been sent to their phone. And you tend to find the speaker goes from one side of the chamber to the other, so they know they're going to get the questions. So they get difficult questions from Reform, probably less difficult questions from the Tories, and then very easy questions from their own side,
yes,
which have been teed up.
What is your impression of it, actually, having been in, what is it now, 6 months? So what's your impression of the place?
Well, I think Parliament is quite dysfunctional. I think, you know, and people can see that now. I was never a great fan of televising Parliament. I think the people in Parliament should be governing the country, not trying to turn themselves into mini superstars. And I think the actual people in Parliament are often quite low grade, thanks to Cameron and Blair, who had policies that weren't based on merit. They were based on quotas, and that was quotas of whether it was race, whether it was sexuality, whether it was gender. That they had all these quotas that they tried to fulfill, which I think weakened the gene pool of Parliament. And if you've got a weak gene pool, obviously, as you know, your ministers are drawn from that MP pool. And if you don't have ministers who have some real life experience and know their way around, they'll never hold the civil service to account. Yeah. And this is why I think we've gone off the rails a bit, because the people, a bit like in a company, you know, the managing director is supposed to hold everybody to account, and the managing director is held to account by the chairman. The problem also in Parliament is I very much like the Speaker. Lindsay Hoyle, he's a very good man, but he is a Labour MP, and I think there is an argument that the Speaker should be impartial. He shouldn't have any political leaning either way, and his job should be to chair Parliament, really. And I find it quite depressing when Keir Starmer was doing his Prime Minister's questions. Somebody asks a perfectly legitimate question. All he does is parrot on about a 22 billion black hole and sits down. Well, that to me isn't functional Parliament. That's not answering the question. And the chairman really should be saying to him, I'm terribly sorry, Prime Minister, you haven't answered the question. Please answer the question. Yeah. Either that, or I think the MP asking the question should have the right of comeback to say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but you know, the 22 billion black hole's got nothing to do with my question. Please answer the question.
Yes.
So I think the public can see that that's not functioning properly. And really the biggest issue, I think, is historically we've got used to a two-party system, the Reds and the Blues. They hand over in a very civilized way power to each other after a period of time. And really what I think we do need now is what Reform's providing, which is we need a disruptor. We need somebody who's going to challenge the status quo and actually become the agent for change. And, you know, look, there will be, whenever change happens, it doesn't happen seamlessly. Often there are issues, but, you know, change is good. Change, rejuvenation, you know, rivers get mature, they get slow, they get silted up, and you need then a bit of an uplift, and a bit of rejuvenation to start the waters flowing a bit more quickly. And I think that's what we need in British politics now.
You mentioned the two-party system as status. It's got to be cracked. Yes, a few people I think will disagree with that, but also, and surely this has come to light for you with your numerous questions that you often put on Twitter, is that there is also this huge, what has been called the blob, as you say, of the civil service, all the unaccountable quangos. It's almost like the sovereignty aspect of Parliament has actually been sort of outsourced to...
The sovereignty of Parliament has been undermined, largely by the work of Blair, Brown, Campbell and Mandelson, with the help of Derry Irvine, who you probably remember was their legal advisor. And through a series of acts such as the Equalities Act and the Human Rights Act, the Bribery Act, they've actually undermined the sovereignty of Parliament. And as you say, they have empowered more and more unelected, unaccountable quangos. And that's the issue I'm grappling with in Great Yarmouth, which we can talk about in a minute.
No.
But that's undermined in the Bill of Rights in 1689. Parliament should be sovereign. Parliament, the elected MPs should be the representatives of the people. They have the monarch, obviously, as the titular head, and then you have the Lords guiding the Commons. So ultimately, the omnipotent House should be the Commons. But the Commons has had, its power has been seeping away, even to the extent, I think, that the people who run Parliament now are almost more powerful than the MPs. And their power has accreted since issues like Dominic Raab, his bullying. I mean, is it bullying or is it holding people to account?
Yeah.
And this is where the civil service has got completely out of control, talking about hurting people's feelings and all the other nonsense that we now get from them. In the old days, people got on with it. You had a robust debate, and you reached a conclusion, and you then executed whatever you'd agreed to do. So I don't know why this has all gone so badly wrong. I suspect it's because we've been living, in my view, in what I call a reverse Darwinian world. So since the 70s and the 80s, I mean, post-war, us, the Anglo-Saxon hegemony, us in America, basically ran the world. And we started to run into trouble in that mid-70s, you probably know, with the banking crisis, and then in 87, and then again in 99, and then again 2007, 8, and then again, obviously, over COVID. And the response of our governments has been this wretched, dishonest response called quantitative easing or systemic risk management, that they call it. So what it's done is it's actually not allowed capitalism to function. So they've actually subverted capitalism. Capitalism is brutal. So in capitalism, failure is a cleansing mechanism. So if something's not fit for purpose, it gets cleaned up and it gets effectively gobbled up by people who are running their businesses or their enterprises more effectively. And that cleanses the system. But what happens with QE and with systemic risk management is you prop up banks that aren't fit for purpose. You prop up companies that are sclerotic and dying. You never actually get the capitalist cleansing process, which is what is so important if a capitalist system is to work. And I'm a free marketeer. I love individual enterprise. I love the individual. I've never liked statism. It's always failed historically. And, I love reading the Austrian school economists. They are, for me, that's how life should be lived. But unfortunately, we've gone a very long way away from those principles now. And I think we are increasingly going to pay the price.
It's almost like, you mentioned the 70s and 80s. It's almost as though Thatcher, I say never happened. It's like Thatcher was sort of like a last hurrah of that kind of approach. We seem to have just taken up where we left off now.
Well, I think Thatcher, well, she's a great lady. I mean, she was, I think, extremely well read, historically very knowledgeable. I think she knew her brief, and as she governed for more periods of time, and let's not forget that she would have probably not been re-elected had it not been for the Falklands War. And there's a wonderful book by John Knott called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. where the Tory grandees were basically queuing up to remove her.
Yeah.
But once she'd won the Falklands War, she was really untouchable for the next 2 elections. And I think it's a bit like with Trump. As you learn about power and you learn about how, particularly in a country with an unwritten constitution, which ours is, you learn that it's convention. You learn exactly how much power you've actually got. And the Prime Minister's got huge amounts of power, but it often takes them too long to work out what that power is. With Trump, he's now worked out, when he got into power last time, I think he had 16 people ready to go. I understand he's got 3,500 people ready to go and hit the ground running when after inauguration. So, they say experience costs money, and ultimately, I think as you get experience and you work out how the system works, you can become more effective. So I think Maggie did a fantastic job. She had the right instincts. She was pro hard work. She was pro people who contributed. She was pro people who employed other people. She was pro enterprise. She was pro the individual. She was anti the state. She was basically pro a sovereign parliament in Westminster, which is accountable to the people, which is, again, we talked about that a bit earlier. That's what we've lost a bit with these quangos, because the quangos, who holds the quangos to account? The answer should be Parliament. But if you take the FCA and the PRA, the financial regulators, who came from the Financial Services Market Act of 2000, that was the genesis of them. Again, Tony Blair. Ultimately, what they've done is they've destroyed our stock market over the last 25 years. Look at our stock market in capitalization terms versus the US stock markets. We've been overregulated. And those people basically have shut down risk-taking. And risk-taking is part of life, and it's certainly part of building a successful company. You usually end up with the man with the idea, Peter Whittle, and the man with the money, Rupert Lowe, and the two meet. And then you get enterprise flows.
Yes.
So the shareholder and the entrepreneur, London used to be the most fantastic place to match them. Now it's not, because we have an aging country where people are more concerned about their pension fund and whether it's risky or not, even though they did some pretty risky things, the LDI investments in pension funds. But I think Maggie got it. She cleansed the system. She will go down in history as a great prime minister. But then we had a weak period with John Major, and then really the cancer set in with Labour in '97. They wanted to create a dependency culture. They didn't want a group of hard to manage individuals who had their own views. They wanted a dependency culture which voted Labour. And Gordon Brown, as you probably know, not only did he sell all our gold at the wrong price, he also basically spent a lot of time putting in all these socialist sort of measures which created a dependency culture, which they hoped would then return Labour time after time after time. So we live in weird times, and what I find really refreshing is that it's the young people who are now coming to vote for reform, and the young people are the ones who I think have got the worst deal out of all this, because you've got the baby boomers who are all retiring, and we know the put and take pension scheme in this country is a fraud. Because they're going to be funding all these pensions. They're also now funding all these immigrants. They're funding almost everything. They're being taxed into oblivion. They are at the bottom of the list when it comes to getting housing or getting any form of support. They pay their taxes, which HMRC collect with great alacrity and often unfairness, but because they're another government department that's completely out of control. Absolutely no joined up thinking between what the government says and what HMRC are doing. So I think those young people they've got a very raw deal. I feel for them because they're often very intelligent, but it's very difficult. The headwinds that they're facing in order to achieve success, unless they're exceptionally intelligent and they take advantage of AI or some other cutting edge change that's taking place, it's very difficult for them to live the kind of life that we've all lived. And you've got these baby boomers now collecting their state pension, who are living in the nicest parts of the country and probably living a very comfortable life and probably don't necessarily share the same political instincts as the young. So I think we've got I think we've got a very interesting dynamic building up there.
Yeah, I think with the younger people, as you say, like people in their 20s, as you say, the back of the queue on these measures, but also they feel, I think, culturally very disinherited compared to people who came before, in the sense that they've grown up at a time being told that Britain is terrible, that particularly if they're young men, that they're terrible for being sort of men, all of this. It seems to me, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what you think of this. Although we've been talking about economics, reform's main appeal for so many people would seem to be a cultural one. I use that broadly in the sense that it's not just about the free market, is it? It's actually about what Britain is, belief in the nation, a belief in, the exceptionalism, if you like, of Britain. Would you say that's correct? I mean, and also the effect that unprecedented migration has had as well. That has cultural effects as well as economic.
Of course, you have to blame both Labour and the Tories for that. I mean, that's something that's happened.
I think the Tories are particularly
Boris is particularly bad. Boris
Yes.
is particularly bad. Having said he was going to cut it, Cameron the same.
Yeah.
They singularly failed to deal with it. But again, it all started, the genesis of it was the Tony Blair and the Human Rights Act, which basically removes our control because the Human Rights Act embeds the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily deport as you should deport. And I've been saying, as you know, on Twitter, that illegal immigration means illegal immigration. And if you break the law, you don't stay here. So they should be detained and deported straight away. But I think with Britain, we've got the best people. A lot of them are leaving, Peter. I know there are 2,500 people queuing to get into Monaco, probably a similar number get into Dubai. Italy, Greece, Portugal, they're all leaving Britain.
Eastern Europe as well.
Well, I think they're quite right. And these are the best people. These are your entrepreneurs, they're your wealth creators, they're your people who make things happen. So they're all leaving because what's happened is the state's got too big. It's taking too much out of the private sector, which is diminishing every day. And we've just seen probably the biggest tax rise in history from Rachel Reeves, who really hasn't got a clue what she's doing. I think genuinely we're heading for a very messy year next year economically.
Just to go back to...
But I just want to finish off because Britain is a great place. And I think that the key is some massive change has got to happen in this next election, whenever it is. Or I think what happens is the malaise becomes far too embedded within the culture, and it could be very difficult. It's going to be difficult enough to change it now, because you referred to the blob. I mean, the blob is quite extraordinary. And when I had a meeting with Daniel Zeichner the other day, who's the DEFRA minister, after about 20 minutes of debating with him as to why I thought this, APR change on farmland was wrong, Steve Reed having said he wouldn't do it, about 4 times before the election. So once he got the votes in the bag, he then resiled on what he'd agreed. But Zeichner looked me in the eye and he said, I think, Rupert, that very often the public sector is more efficient than the private sector. So I looked at him. I said, Daniel, if you think that, I'm wasting my time.
Yeah.
And I got up and walked out. There's absolutely no point. You can't deal with people like that. So the problem, and that runs through the entire Labour Party. I mean, the front bench people, there are 26 of them. Only three of them have got a modicum of business experience. I would argue it's a completely irrelevant business experience. Most of them clambered their way up the old slippery pole, either in local government or being, sort of an assistant to an MP, or they'd clambered their way up. And that's all they know. They don't know what's happening in the real world. And again, this is something we can talk about, which is going on in Great Yarmouth, which I've taken a lot of my time to uncover. But so I think Britain's got lots of special qualities. I never like people talking it down. I think we've got the best people, but we've probably got the worst government we've ever had, the worst group of people in Parliament we've ever had, and certainly the most malign and ineffective civil service that we've ever had. I do think the civil service post-war had this sort of ethic of serving, and they understood that their job was to serve the people. And this is really the key to the whole thing. Government is there to serve the people. It's not there to dictate to the people, and that's what's happened. So, these civil servants have licensed everything. They've registered everything. They you have to basically, you have all sorts of fetters on you now, and you've become like Gulliver. You become tied down as an individual. So you're not as free as we used to be to get up and to innovate and do things that we should be doing, to drive the greater, if you like, standard of living for more people.
When it comes to capitalism, and companies, the private sector, if we want a better expression, how would you deal with the fact that they are shackled now by all these various, there's a DEI, diversity and inclusion, but then there's also the, good governance and environmentalism thing that basically they are entirely, it seems to me now, ruled by a kind of public sector ethos. I mean, would reform just do away with that stuff?
Of course, I think we've said we'll scrap every single DEI-related role in the public sector. If you run your private company, and you want to spend your money on DEI officers or whatever, that's up to you. I mean, that's your choice. If I had a bit of sort of a scud with various people, particularly my local council in Great Yarmouth, because I say, if you want to fly the LGBTQ plus flag from your own house, that's your choice. It should not be flown from government buildings. Union Jack should fly from government buildings. And if and again, people then get upset about that. Why? Because, and I actually got lots of letters from people who are gay and they thanked me because they don't want to actually dictate how the rest of the country lives their lives. And I think that's incredibly interesting. One chap even sent me 40 quid in cash in a letter. And he said, go and have a good feed in Parliament. So that was extremely good of him and thanked me for what I was doing. But I actually sent the 40 quid back and thanked him. And I had lots of those. So I think that most people are decent, Peter. But I think government can become malign. And in answer to your DEI means that once you've got these DEI officers everywhere, and you should see how much is being spent on DEI in the National Health Service, in the government. Once you've got a DEI culture, you end up with DEI. It's a bit like sort of personnel officers. In my day, we virtually had no personnel officers. And then the next thing is you've got personnel officers everywhere. Next thing is personnel officers are running the show. Well, DEI is like that.
Yes.
And it's completely unproductive. It's divisive. And it's not necessary.
Well, actually...
we publicly say reform's policy is we will scrap every DEI-related role in the public sector straight away.
Right. There is a reason, I understand, with business as to why they have got these departments too. And it does derive from statutes, actually. It derives from Blairite statute.
Of course, it all comes from these Blairite laws. Largely the Equality Act. That needs to be repealed straight away. So does the Human Rights Act. So does the Bribery Act. Again, interesting one. I think Keir Starmer broke the Bribery Act. And actually, he did pay some money back after I raised it. All this money he accepted for his clothes and his wife's clothes, and the front bench accepted for parties and all sorts of other things from this Lord Ali character, who you probably know is a gay Muslim, which is quite in itself a rare beast. But he's clearly wants political influence, and the Bribery Act is quite clear. It's a Brownite Act. Actually, it's a Brownite Act. It had its genesis in Brown, but actually it was passed by the Tories by the Cameron Clegg,
yes,
the coalition. So, look, I mean, I think he broke it. I haven't written to the police. I probably should write to the police about it, but I haven't. But I wrote to the Speaker. I wrote to the Parliamentary Commission on Standards, who said it was nothing to do with him. But I'm pretty sure he did. And in the city, which I was in for a long time, increasingly we couldn't go to the Chelsea Flower Show. We couldn't go and do things that had a value of more than a certain amount, pretty low amount, 50 quid or something. Even going out to a restaurant for lunch had to be disclosed to compliance officers. Well, You tell me how it's right for the Prime Minister to be, or the future Prime Minister to be, having his wife's clothes bought by somebody who has clearly got political influence over him. And he had not had access to number 10. He was going in and out of number 10 whenever he wanted to. Yeah. So no, that doesn't work for me. And I, as you probably know, I'm not in Parliament to pork barrel any sort of expenses like that. I give my salary to Great Yarmouth Charities each month. And I think, I'm 67, I'm a pensioner. I'm in this to change the way we're governed. That's what I want to see. I want to see a country that's more commonsensical than it is at the moment. Common sense has died, by the way. I mean, it's common sense that we need the return of.
You are coming quite late to politics generally, aren't you?
No, well, not really, because I stood for the referendum party in '97.
Oh, that was
my deposit in the
Jimmy Goldsmith.
6.6% I got there. Before that, I'd read and challenged the Maastricht Treaty, which I thought was an appalling piece of legislation. I mean, full of more loose ends and a plate full of spaghetti. But most of our politicians didn't read it before they signed it, so it got signed. Then I stood in '97 for the referendum party because I didn't want to lose the pound. So to my mind, the pound that was the end of sovereign Britain. If we'd lost our currency and we'd signed up for this, what I call an index, which I think the euro is, it's an amalgam of, so instead of being, the pound is a function of British GDP. The euro is a function of an amalgam of Greek GDP and French GDP, and France is bust, by the way, and German GDP and Irish GDP, and it's an amalgam of all these different economies. So if and when something goes wrong, who are you going to go to? Are you going to rely on, if it's a Greek printed note, because you can actually see where they're all printed, you go to the Greeks to say, I've got a Greek note or a German note. Arguably, you could then get an arbitrage between a German note, which might be worth more than a Greek note.
Yes.
So look, I think I was absolutely fanatical about not losing the pound, and we didn't. Because, by the way, all three of our leaders at the time, Tony Blair, John Major and Perry Ashton, were all rabidly pro the euro, as was our establishment. So they would have signed up. But Jimmy Goldsmith spent £50 million. He saved the pound. He never gets enough credit for it. So then I did a lot for Vote Leave. I did a lot for Action Business for Sterling next. Then I did a lot for Vote Leave. And I thought, like 17.4 million other people, that when we won the vote, we would leave the European Union, which we haven't really done yet, in truth. But no, Westminster and the civil service didn't want to leave. They didn't want to respect the will of the people, which that was a vote of the people. It was a very simply worded referendum. And the majority of people voted to leave the European Union, which we really hadn't done yet. So then it sort of, I got so vexed again about Theresa May that I emailed Nigel Farage, and he happened to have just set up the Brexit Party. So I stood for the Brexit Party, and I was elected as an MEP for the West Midlands. And we spent a year, about 9 months in the European Parliament, got ourselves, in theory, a kind of Brexit, even if we didn't agree with the Northern Ireland Protocol. It was a sort of Brexit, which it was just a classic Boris deal, really, wasn't it? Plenty of loose ends on that one. And obviously, Northern Ireland is part of Great Britain.
Yes.
And it should never be treated differently. But it was the European Union who didn't want to see us leave. They've done their very best to punish us for deciding to leave. They don't respect the vote of the British people, the democratic vote. They want to protect their club. And their club, by the way, Peter, is failing. So their club is failing as we sit here. As I say, France is bust. Germany's economy is in terrible trouble. You've got all sorts of other sort of weaker economies on the periphery. So I can see huge trouble for Europe. I think funding this hugely expensive European Parliament, which, as you know, is spread all over Europe because of the treaties. So you're in Strasbourg, you're in Luxembourg, you're in Brussels. I mean, the actual cost of running that place is huge. So without our sort of membership fee, which I think was the second largest, they've all got to pay more. So gradually these people are going to have to decide, do we want to be part of this? And the Danes are probably uncertain about whether they want to be in there. So are some of the others. But so the EU has been brutal with the way they've treated us. It's given what we've done for Europe throughout history. I think it's frankly a bit rich. But that's the way the Europeans are. I love Europe, but I want my own sovereign nation, and I've never understood why we can't have a collection of European sovereign nations who actually cooperate. That would be a far better way of doing it.
Yes. You mentioned they're not really getting Brexit. For most people, it would be the quite unbelievable outcome in terms of migration. You know, that's why, I firmly believe that's why most people voted actually to leave. Or if it's not the main one, it's certainly up there. And yet we have had the most extraordinary influx. I'm not talking about illegals, I'm talking about legal, like 900,000 net. Reform's policy.
But you've probably seen, Peter, that the numbers that we get keep being revised up. I think they're revised up
Yes.
17 times and down 3 times. So the bias is towards not informing people of the true numbers. And that's why...
The whole thing, yes.
And in answer to your question about, you know, I've worked out with my parliamentary questions, I have 20 a day. So what I'm trying to do is not make any judgments myself. I believe that good government is transparent government. So I'm asking these questions, getting answers, and I'm then posting it on Twitter and on Facebook so that people can make their own judgments. People can decide, is that right, is that not right? But the fact is, you know, our government is so out of control, it doesn't give the British electorate the correct data. Now, what I can't tell you is whether the front bench are aware of that data. So maybe the questions I'm asking are enlightening them as to the depth of the problem. I think it's quite possible. I think the civil service knows.
Right, well,
They know, but you know, I'm not sure the front bench does. As I say, the front bench, like a lot of people in Westminster, swim around in this very sort of tight little community, and I'm not sure they really understand the real world. And that's why I think you had this schism between the British people who said they wanted to leave and the governing class who didn't want to leave. You know, if you'd had a poll in Westminster or the civil service about whether they'd want to leave, no, or the BBC, they were all rampant Remainers. But actually, no, it's the people. That is what is sovereign Britain, is the people.
Yes.
And that's why there's a lack of respect for the electorate. That's what's going on at the moment.
well, it is, I would suggest, actually, in the case of the Tories and Boris Johnson, more than lack of respect, outright deception of a quite extraordinary level. I mean, in the sense that they were actually saying, were they not, since 2016, you know, we're going to take back control of our borders. In fact, they were actually liberalising all measures about legal migration. Reform's position is called net zero migration. And I wonder whether you could explain this a little bit clearer for us, actually, Rupert, because I think a lot of people just know that or feel that you would be tougher on migration. But it's a question of quite how. I mean, as I understand it, net migration is basically, if you've got 400,000 people coming into the country, you've got 400,000 leaving, that's net zero migration.
But it isn't quite
right.
that simple, Peter, is it? Because what you've got is you've got people leaving. So these people who are leaving to go to Monaco.
Yeah.
So you're actually losing your best people. So your net migration figure is the figure of those coming in and those leaving. And so actually it's worse because you're losing your best people and you're getting even more people who are unproven, who are from different cultures, who maybe have a different agenda to us. So our view is, and my view is, I'm not anti-structured immigration. If you look at what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore, he ran a proper immigration policy. And he effectively hired people into Singapore who were going to contribute to Singapore's growth. And look at Singapore now, it's flying. You know, I used to visit it in the 80s and it was just developing then. It's a fantastic country. So he used immigration properly. And immigration is necessary. But what's happened is our immigration is out of control, both legal and illegal. So the first thing we have to do is deal with the illegal immigrants. They have to go. They're here illegally. By very definition of the fact, they have come here illegally, they should be detained and they should be deported.
But
In the same way that
Nigel
I'm
was
saying
not-
on Twitter, foreign criminals in our prisons, 10,500 of them, we now know how many, they should be deported. If you come here and you commit crime, you should be deported. There's no reason for you to stay here.
Nigel Farage seemed to set his face against that in one interview he did recently when he did it. So you're not for mass deportations, and he said, no, I'm not going down that route.
But this is deportations of illegal
I'm talking about that.
migrants. So I'm giving you my opinion.
Right. Okay.
I mean, whatever Nigel's opinion is his opinion. We're a band of 5 merry men, and we have our own opinions.
Yeah.
I have different opinions to Nigel on devolution. I would reverse devolution. I think devolution was a very bad thing. I think the Senate and the Scottish government is basically, that's running a fraud funded by the British taxpayer through the Barnett formula.
Yeah.
So I think it's an absolute scam, the whole thing. The judiciary is in bed with the police, and the police are in bed with the politicians. I mean, the whole thing is just an awful example of devolution. The Senate too, I mean, a lot of Welsh people, I said this at the conference, and it's not our policy, but it's my view. At the end of the day, the Senate is very unpopular in Wales, and we're probably going to do quite well in Wales and Scotland. So look, I mean, we're a party where thankfully we can still have our own opinions. That doesn't necessarily, you don't have to parrot the party line. I think we can all talk about it. My view is firmly, you start with the illegal migrants and you deport them. You detain them and you deport them. If they come over in a boat, and I wouldn't make it that comfortable either. I would put them in a tented camp on a West Coast island until they were deported to wherever they should be living.
Yeah.
Because most of these people have come through safe countries, Peter. You know, the treaties allow us to actually send them back.
And also, many of them actually go alone.
We're paying a fortune to France.
Yes.
And is France functioning as it should do?
Yeah. Not
really. Do you trust the French to deliver what we're sending them 500 million a year to do? Clearly, it's not working. So no, I'm very clear that if Britain is to rebuild itself, we have to have, the law is the law. Come here illegally, you don't stay. The Australians showed us how to do it. They stopped anybody who came illegally was sent back, or they were sent to a processing centre offshore. I've forgotten the name of it. It was called, there's an island they send them all to, something. Anyway, so zero tolerance. And by the way, if you come illegally, they never, ever will accept you if you apply to come and live legally. So the penalty is come illegally, you're never going to come legally. Good rule. I like that rule. And Australia has virtually zero problems with illegal immigration.
Right.
So then you've got too much legal immigration. It's really the legal immigration which causes a much bigger problem. And that's what we've talked about with Boris. Boris said one thing and did another. Let huge numbers of people in, not necessarily vetted, not necessarily going to make an actual contribution to our economy. Proper sort of managed immigration should be, you want to bring in people who are going to contribute to skill sets that you don't have and you need. And that's how it should be done. So our view is in the short term, you need zero net immigration. And that's, even net immigration being zero is not great if you're losing your best people and you're replacing even more lower grade people. And look, there are good people who come into the country and contribute. But equally, I think there are lots of people who are so strongly of the view that their culture is better than the Christian culture which they're coming to, that they continue to live their lives in the way that they want to live their lives. They may work very effectively, but they're not integrating. They're not living by our rules. They're not effectively accepting our culture. They still want their own culture.
How would you change? I mean, the thing is, therefore, people, you're hearing a lot now, integration. How do you integrate people, first of all, on such a massive scale, right? Which I would have thought mitigates against it to begin with. But then also, when those people actually, and it's not just minorities, if you have like 32% of Muslims wishing that we had Sharia law, or if you have 50% of Muslims believing that there should be no depiction whatsoever of the Prophet Muhammad, all of this kind of stuff, huge effect on things like free speech, which we're already seeing coming through in Parliament.
Well, to me, that's unacceptable. Free speech is free speech is the cornerstone of Parliament, and it's the cornerstone of the country. And by the way, it's embedded in the Declaration of Rights in 1689, as you probably know. So it's absolutely essential we have free speech. This is where this DEI nonsense causes so much trouble, because people say, "Oh, you've hurt my feelings," and I'm terribly sorry. That's my opinion. That's how you go to the truth. So, I mean, look, there is no silver bullet now, Peter. People want silver bullets from people who sit around interviews like this. There is no silver bullet. We have an issue. We have a problem. But my view, and I can give you my view, is if you come to this country, you live by our laws, you speak our language, and you effectively integrate. If you don't want to do that, go and live somewhere else. Because this country is a Christian country with its own laws, its own history, and its own culture. If you want to go and live in Dubai, you have to live by the laws of Dubai. If you want to go and live in Abu Dhabi, the same. If you want to go and live almost anywhere else in the world, go and live in Japan, you've got to live by their laws. You have to abide by their laws. Now, to me, that's courtesy. That is ultimately logic. It's common sense. It's their country. This is our country. This country has been built on the toil and the hard work of generations of British people. Nobody else. Okay, we've had some colonies that have helped us, and we've had some people who fought for us in the war, but this is our country. Come here, you live by our rules.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm vexed about the amount the NHS spends on translation. Same with the civil service.
Haven't you been asking questions about that?
Of course. You live in a country that speaks English. So you either speak English, or if you don't speak English, you bring your translator along, who you pay for, or you find some way of using AI to do the translation for you. But we should not be doing this multiple translation across the NHS and everywhere else. It's just wrong. And I think if you ask most British people, they'd agree with that. So look, I mean, we have lost the plot, Peter, really. And I think, who was it who said, it was G.K. Chesterton who said, when decay has finally set in, when common sense becomes uncommon, something like that.
Yes.
And I think we're there.
Oh, I think we're at 10 to, or 5 to 12, so I think the saying goes. You mentioned that you're MP for Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth, for people watching who don't know, it's in Norfolk. It's a coastal town.
It's Norfolk, yeah.
Yes, and also it was, we went on a family holiday there in 1977, but it was already sort of, like many resorts, declining around then. I mean, can you characterize it for us? So would it be, I hate this expression, left behind, but it is one of those classic resort towns, isn't it, that's sort of been left behind?
It's a wonderful place, and I had to go east to proper people to win a seat. Yeah. They are still a community. They still, as I always say, if they don't know each other, they know somebody who does know each other. So it's still a community. Word spreads very quickly. I think they can tell a wrong 'un from a right 'un. It's a Hanseatic League port, as you know. The Hanseatic League used to trade up, Hamburg's and other Hanseatic, all across that northern European zone. So it's got a lot of history. It was a huge fishing port. It suffered as a result of our membership of the EU. I think post-war there were something like 165 fishing vessels. How many do you think there are now?
Don't know how many.
One. And they used to process herring. It's called the herring capital of the world, the bloater. And their local football club is called the Bloaters. So it used to be a very vibrant fishing port. It had fish processing. It had offshore oil and gas for a while in the 70s and 80s. That's obviously going to be suffering. It's now got offshore wind farms. It's suffered a lot from our membership of the EU because that's basically the price for our membership was to surrender probably the richest fishing waters in the world. And to me, nothing summarizes the decline of Britain more than the fact that we have the best fishing grounds in the world, and yet we're a net importer of fish.
Yes.
That says it all to me. And that's where things have all gone badly wrong. So it's a wonderful place. Obviously, I think the whole of the coastal communities have been affected by our membership of the EU. And I think in the next election, we will win all the red wall seats, which, as you know, went to Boris in 19 when we stood down in and gave the Tories an 80-seat majority, which they basically completely wasted.
Do you think that was a mistake, by the way, Rupert?
Well, that was a decision Nigel made. I think it was a logical decision. Could we have waited a few more days because the nominations closed on the Thursday? We probably could have waited a few more days and made the Tories sweat a bit more. But I think, we tried to reason with them that they should give us 10 seats. They'd never won up in the red wall seats, but they wouldn't do that. So we probably should have made them work a bit harder. But no, Nigel made that decision, and he, as you know, as things were, he was the majority shareholder in the party. So ultimately, he could propose second and carry, which he did.
Right.
We gave them an 80-seat majority, and tell me one thing they did with it. I can't think of one thing they did, which
Nothing.
I would have had a list of things I would have done immediately. But so Boris was, in my view, a failure. I think he still has some bizarre view that he's going to make a comeback. I don't quite. He must be deluded if he thinks that, but he seems to apparently have that opinion. So I think, as a constituency, it's quite special in a funny sort of way. It's got the Achill Strait, which effectively is a road, a sort of road that almost links Great Yarmouth across the marshes, which I would like to see dualled. I've got a big issue there at the moment. We have a wonderful port there, which, as I say, it was a Hanseatic lead port, which I think is not functioning as effectively as it could, and I'd like to see that. I want the message to go out that Great Yarmouth is open for business. And the issue we've had recently involves a ship called the MV Ruby, the motor vessel Ruby, and it got into distress in those storms in October. And ultimately, it ended up being a ship in distress, and the Department for Transport called Peel Ports, and Peel Ports accepted it. It had 20,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which to you and I is fertilizer.
Yeah.
Used to grow our food,
which
which I have on my farm in dumpy bags, double-skinned, polypropylene with an inner liner to ensure that if it's stored on a damp floor, it's kept dry, because once nitrogen gets wet, it sort of it clogs up,
Yes.
and then it doesn't run through either the drill or the fertilizer spinner. So anyway, this stuff landed, HSE was notified, and nothing, Peel Ports started to deal with it. And then, as I say, the ship was damaged in the storm, so I think a bit of seawater had got into the forward hold, and one or two of the bags at the bottom had either a centimetre high up to a 40 centimetre high sort of watermark where water had been sloshing around. But these bags, as I say, are waterproof. So ultimately, they told HSE. HSE then started taking interest. HSE didn't attend site when they first landed, and they didn't attend site 2 weeks later when these marks were found and reported. Anyway, one thing led to another, Peter, and it goes to your point of basically decision-making in silos by unaccountable quangos. And the outcome of this is that Peel Ports had their own people inspecting these bags who were quite happy that they were dry. You could rub the line off where the mark was on the bag. And the ship, I understand, had been carrying coal before, so there was a bit of coal dust in the bottom of the hold. I've got pictures of the ship being unloaded. And anyway, so HSE told Peel Ports they couldn't unload any of these bags onto the dock, because apparently when it leaves the ship and goes onto the dock, it becomes health and safety's responsibility.
Right.
While it's on the ship, it's I think it's the Marine Coast Guard's responsibility. So Peel Ports thought they could pull the bags off, deal with them on the dock, no problem. Anyway, one thing led to another, again, all being driven by the DFT. At the time, Louise Haig was there, so I mean, whether she had anything to do with this is possible. I'll be asking that question in Parliament tomorrow. So the ship was they then started worrying about the fact that fertilizer can explode. But if you're worried about prilled ammonium nitrate exploding, Peter, you'd have to inspect every lorry that carries 40 or 50 tons of this stuff around the country, every farm that stores it, every tractor and trailer that I drive around on my farm and would have to be inspected on a regular basis. Look, this is pretty inert stuff. And I've actually got pictures of it being dropped when a cable broke from about 20 feet, and it all happens is a bag split a bit and you lose a bit of prilled ammonium nitrate. Anyway, so one thing led to another, and you can't believe this, they dumped between 280 and 300 tons, we don't know exactly, of prilled ammonium nitrate into the sea, 12 miles off Great Yarmouth.
Right.
But it's worse than that, because when I'm drilling with my drill, I lift the bag up with my forklift, I swing it over the drill, and I then empty the bag into the drill, and I then have a spare plastic bag, right, which we then dispose of. It's recycled. They dumped 280 to 300 tons of prilled ammonium nitrate in double-skinned polypropylene bags into the sea. So when you get a storm, those bags will wash up. They all float. They'll wash up to the surface. They'll wrap around ships' propellers. They didn't notify the Dutch. They didn't notify the local fishing industry. I can't tell you what a complete shambles the whole thing was. And I think that the culprits obviously are DFT, and they were effectively driving the conversation. When I find it, and by the way, they refused to let me. I was not informed of this until it had all happened. I was told I was specifically excluded as the elected MP for Great Yarmouth by the DFT. The DFT say it was the locals making a mountain out of a molehill. The locals say they were under strict instructions not to tell me by the Department of Transport. And we came close to Great Yarmouth being evacuated because HSE put the fear of God into all these people who aren't farmers, who haven't ever handled ammonium nitrate, probably don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
They were even talking about evacuating Great Yarmouth. I mean, complete and utter nonsense. And put a no-fly zone in place. I mean, I've interviewed almost everybody, but the most important thing is that the sovereignty of Parliament was undermined. So the local elected MP, Rupert Lowe, was not told. He was actually excluded from being consulted about
Because you're a reform or what?
That's a good question. Is it because I understood about ammonium nitrate being a farmer? Or is it because I'm a Reform MP?
Yeah.
Very good question. I don't know the answer. That's one of my questions in Parliament tomorrow. So I was told on the 28th of November by the Minister, a chap called Mike Kane. I then did some research. I went back to him and said, I've got some more questions. I would like to talk to these people who are involved, who I now know are involved. And he said he was too busy to see me. I have to pursue the parliamentary process if I wanted to get more information. So I have. I've called an adjournment debate. I went and saw the Speaker. I've got an adjournment debate tomorrow evening. It's the last bit of business in the House before we go on holiday. I must say I'm quite looking forward to a few days of having fought 2 elections this year.
Yes.
Started a new job at the age of 66. I'm quite looking forward to a few days at home, eating a bit of turkey and drinking a bit of fine red wine. But so this was, in my view, it's environmental terrorism. And it is unacceptable. And of course now you've got HSE blaming MCA blaming DEFRA blaming the Environment Agency. I mean, you can't make it up. It's siloed decision-making by unaccountable quangos. And this is what's undermined Parliament. So this is an absolute. And how can you exclude the elected MP? Isn't the elected MP the representative of the people of Great Yarmouth?
But also, aren't you, as a team of 5 Reform MPs, haven't you been bypassed when it comes to all the committees and everything?
Well, we're on no select committees. No. Again, this is how government controls the agenda in Parliament, because they can put in urgent statements. They can effectively change the agenda. I mean, we did have an MHRA debate. It's going to now be in January. And suddenly we ended up on a Thursday, which is almost unheard of, with ministerial statements that burnt up the schedule. And then we had some debate on gay veterans, which again, everybody, Uncle Tom Cobley and all wanted to speak at. So in the end, our debate was cut from 3 hours to an hour, and then it was cancelled. So this is how the government, the sitting government, can actually influence the agenda, which makes it very difficult for you to, if you're in Parliament, to land the punches. The punches can only be landed if you burn up huge amounts of your time sitting in the chamber, waiting to get your question or waiting to make your speech, or land whatever point you want to land. So it isn't straightforward. I mean, it's extremely. I mean, we should really have allotted times to vote, for instance. So sometimes we're voting at 11 o'clock at night. So people are hanging around in Parliament, waiting unnecessarily very often. If you actually had your debates, there's no reason why your vote has to happen immediately after the debate. You could have programmed voting times. So everybody can then make sure they vote. And I don't like praising Europe, but to their credit, they ran a far more effective parliamentary agenda in the European Parliament than they do in our Parliament.
Well, what might change? I mean, we're recording this on Wednesdays this week, and the headlines this morning have all been about this phenomenal amount of money that you might get from Elon Musk, which could therefore mean that you're no longer a band of five, that you're many more. What's your reaction to this?
Well, look, I think what Elon Musk is doing in America and what Trump is doing is fantastic. I think that's going to be, I'd love to see the same thing coming here. And as you know, very often we follow the Americans. Unfortunately, we followed them with the wokery. And hopefully we're going to follow them in reversing it all.
Well,
and the sort of, DOGE, the government, sort of Department of Government Expenditure, whatever it is, or efficiency, will come here. So I think Elon Musk is an example of a man who's built up his fantastic businesses. He's clearly very bright. He's clearly a free thinker. Look at what he did at Twitter. Cut out 80% of the overhead, and it's functioning very well. He's obviously a libertarian. He's clearly believes in the American Constitution. So great, good on him. If he wants to donate to us in any way he can, I would welcome it with both hands. But I think we're seeing many more people now stepping forward. My friends looked at me askance when I said I was going to win a seat in Parliament for the Reform Party. I think they all thought I was a bit of a nutter. They now think, or did think I was a nutter, when, having been elected, I said we're going to win the next general election. So, and I've told Nigel Farage he needs to prepare himself to be the next Prime Minister. He is now leading a movement which is gathering momentum. And I think if we can enlist help from libertarian free thinkers like Musk, I would welcome that. But there are many other people who I would welcome help from, people who've got expertise in policy, which we don't all have. I mean, we don't know the answer to everything. People expect us to turn up and say, what's your policy on this? What's your policy on that? Our policy basically is going to be founded on common sense. As I just said, I want the return of common sense. And actually cutting the amount of regulations, cutting the size of the state, empowering the individual, and allowing people to find their own level. Statism tends to effectively pollute the relationship between people and allow those people who arguably shouldn't be at the top of the tree to be at the top of the tree, while those arguably who should be aren't.
Reverse Darwinism, as he said.
I call it reverse. We've got a reverse Darwinist. I would like a bit more Darwinism.
Yeah. Well, look, I know you want
Darwinian survival of the fittest.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Anyway, Rupert.
Pleasure.
Thanks for your time. That's it for this week, and on the run, as you can see. See you next time.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.